There he is.
What's going on?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Oh, good. I'm good. I got this recording, so we should get some pretty good stuff here.
Tight?
I think this is going to be exciting.
Hell yeah.
Let's just go into this. So I was looking at your website, and you have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight models, but in theory, you have one, two, three, four, five, six that are actual models, and then the Feldhaus series and the Exo Moons are kind of variations on what you already have, right?
You got it.
And then you also offer everything as a base.
Sort of. I think the one thing that's not a base yet is the crescent moon. But like I could if we're talking custom shop, I absolutely could sit down and design that. I just haven't put the time into like the production style models and what I want the standard version of that to look like.
So you started with the Blood Moon. So and from our conversations, you worked with somebody before you went out on your own. You didn't do any school or anything.
I didn't do school. No, I apprenticed in a repair shop for I don't know how many years formally. I really just kind of hung around after it hit a point where, I learned everything I was going to learn and was just kind of working here and there to help out around the shop, help them kind of grow their business until, I wound up having to get an apartment myself and pay rent. I had to get a job where I could afford that,
Uh-huh.
and started doing repair work on my own on the side just to keep doing it. I had the itch.
Yeah. And so while did you go into the repair world saying, okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to build, or was the building a byproduct of the
The,
repairing?
the building was a happy accident.
Okay.
Truly. I started working in the repair shop just because I was obsessed with guitars.
Okay.
Uh, I had just started playing guitar in early high school and wouldn't shut the hell up about them. It kind of evolved out of that, and then just it was a blessing and a curse because being around stuff that's constantly in pieces and in progress and learning how they work, and the science and the math behind them, I got obsessed with modifying my own guitars and
Yep.
then parts building my own guitars. And then, one day the guy that I was apprenticing under said, all right, well, I'm going to teach you how to make a telly. And like, that was it, man. That first scratch in that uh, column was like, oh, but I like that part.
So would you say that your repair experience informed your design?
100%. Still
Yeah.
to this day, everything I'm doing when I'm coming up with a design, a new model, details of a design, what have you, it's entirely based on what I've experienced working on other people's guitars,
Yeah.
what they do and don't like, what things I'm constantly doing or was constantly doing to other people's guitars, all of that is the direct influence.
Yeah, because I'm noticing on the Blood Moon render that you have here. Now
Hmm.
they don't all have a plate on them. It looks like you do them in different configurations for the controls, but like the first thing that I noticed besides the shape and the design of everything is you have a plate that I've never seen before on a guitar. So did this make this into production? Do you use this plate?
When I was designing this whole series, I knew I wanted everything to be consistent in such a way that I can finally order stuff in bulk and stock up on things. I want to be able to just kind of do this across the line where I could just have a day where I'm going to sit down and wire 100 of those control plates or
Yep.
or whatever. I've always been against the grain with traditional telly style control plates because I hate having the switch at the top. I always went reverse.
Towards the neck pickup.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I have since come up with a very slightly modified design. It'll still be like that with knobs on either side and the switch in the center, but I've kind of angled it differently so that I can fit a super switch, a super
Okay.
five-way switch in there. And I have a company that is laser cutting designs. I drew up an Illustrator for that and anodizing them for me so I can still get the colors I want.
Cool. Cool.
So
Yeah,
that
because
will be the design, but slightly different.
this is the best of both worlds. Because if you use like a traditional telly plate, your switch is going to be here, your volume, and then your tone.
Right.
But if you flip it, then you get your switch back here, and then your volume and your tone. So
Mhm.
you're putting the tone back here,
Yep.
and then you have the switch. So that gives you like a really, really nice, if you wanted to sweep, do like a volume sweep or whatnot.
Mhm.
Like I see the thought process behind that. Now, do you only do this? You'll do these guitars in any pickup configuration for the most part,
When
or
you're
does
ordering
this?
custom shop, yeah, you can tell me what you want your pickup layout to be. You can tell me what you want your control layout to be. I mean, that fully depends on the customer. I've had customers send me mock-ups and drawings of exactly what they want.
That's
And then I've had other people just kind of point to either reference images or stuff on my website and be like, I want it like that, you know?
is this when you started making the Blood Moon?
Mhm.
Has this changed a lot since your original? I don't want to say rendering, but your original design of it. Did you do a lot of modification, or is
Uh,
this kind of what you popped out the gate?
of all the models, this is extremely, extremely close to the very first vision I had. My initial idea of it was a humbucker in the bridge and a P90 in the neck because that's kind of my favorite
Yeah,
combination. And
that's my favorite too.
dude, it's people sleep on that. The 3x3 headstock is newer. I had our 6-in-line shape that me and my wife came up with originally on it. That's the one. Other than that, I mean, the body shape has not changed at all. I think the only thing I've done is take off the sharp points so that finish isn't checking and breaking on the
Yeah.
corners.
Hmm.
Because even with that bevel, it has a slight softness to it. It's not sharp, hard bevels.
What I
Yep.
found as being a CAD designer and being the person that can make the parts,
Yeah.
it's great because I don't have to go and pay people to make the parts, but it's awful because I'll go and produce something and
Mhm.
then I'll be like, oh, I don't know about that, and that leads to redrawing stuff. So
Yep.
I this is the first version of my parlor that I made. So I started this a long, long time ago, and I designed this heel, and it's really
Okay.
small. And so I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. Like there's a huge tenon in here, and it should be okay. But so that led to me changing the heel, and then I changed the heel, and like while I'm doing this, so I'll change the peg head, and I'll change the volute shape, and so now through making a few of these, I've redone everything just on the neck 5 times, not even including the fretboard. That because that's what I do all day. So I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, I want to have the nicest product that I can off the machine.
Absolutely.
But what I've found, and this is why like when I saw your story about doing talking about design, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of talk about the difference between somebody who's making templates and then going and making it by hand versus somebody who is designing it on a CAD software. A good majority of the decisions that I make when I'm making something has to
Mhm.
do with the tooling I'm going to use on the machine or what the machine is capable of. In handwork, you have a whole lot more fine tools that
For
you can
sure.
really get into corners, and you can really sculpt a guitar into whatever you envision it being. And that's the beauty of hand building things, is not every single one of them is going to be exactly the same. Like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
gonna take a little more off here because it feels better. Whereas me, like, I have to go, okay, well, my wrists, I have to be able to fit a 5/8 ball end mill in there.
Right.
Otherwise, the machine won't accept it. So,
Yeah.
so much of guitar design when it comes to drawing it in CAD
Mhm.
and then camming it and putting it into an actual production setting has to do with, well, what can the machine do?
And that's something I respect a lot because it's something I've had to learn on a much more basic level when I'm designing templates is, all right, well, do I want to do all of this off of one template? Do I want to design this in a set of templates? What router bit am I going to use for that so I know
Exactly.
what size to make the corners and yeah.
Yep. So I'll get people who come to me and they'll say, "Hey, I wanna have, this pickup cavity is gonna be this deep, and but I want the corner to be an eighth inch." And I'm like, okay, well, that's
Good
fine.
luck.
That's fine, but we're dealing with a bit that's an eighth inch going through this much material.
Hmm.
there's going to be a little bit of deflection there. So like, do you
And plan on breaking some bits and factoring that into your
exactly?
cost.
It's like everybody when they're first getting into CNC, they're like, oh, this is going to be like solve so many of my problems. Like I'm just going to be able to just, oh, everything's going to be great. And it's like, no, it comes with a whole new set of
Yep.
issues. So it was interesting for me going through the Gallup school and then doing everything by hand and then immediately being thrown into design. That's all I did.
Hell yeah.
And the two don't cross over a lot.
It is a very specific skill to force them to cross over in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So getting back to your models, so
Sure.
you started with the blood moon and then what was after the blood moon? What so and how long were you producing the blood moon before you said, okay, I want a new model?
I think I made two.
Two blood moons.
Yeah, both were prototypes. Neither still exist. I screwed with them so much in those early learning stages that they weren't anything I was proud enough to put out there and let people try, but I knew I liked the design. The Blood Moon sort of draws inspiration from a guitar from the 80s that only existed for a very short window of time, the Fender Performer.
Yep.
And when I first started looking into making templates to make it repeatable, I had reached out to John Page, who worked at Fender when that happened and designed the Performer, just to see like, hey, you wouldn't happen to have templates, drawings, something so that I don't make this too similar because I don't want to just make the Fender Performer. As
Yep.
much as people on Instagram love to jump out and be like, that's a, you know, um, I reached out to him about that. Super nice guy, super supportive of what I was doing. Sent me tracings of the original factory templates for bass and guitar. And basically said, like, as long as you don't make replicas of that exact thing, I'm totally cool with whatever you're doing. So model number two was much more close to the Performer, but where I throw everyone off, and this is why I would really love to get one to have in the shop, is my Elite model, which is called the Elite because the Fender Performer was originally the Jazz Bass Elite at Fender
Mhm.
before it became the Performer. My guitar model takes the bass body shape from that, modified as a little bit, and then put guitar, everything on it. So mine is much bigger than a Fender Performer is
Okay.
overall. But that was model number two. So, you have the more straight S style bottom of the body, and then you have the Elite, which is much more offset. That bass side horn comes up a lot further.
Mhm.
And they balance
Okay.
completely differently in your lap.
So he sent you not only the drawings for the guitar, but he sent you the drawings for the bass too. That's
Hmm.
super
And
cool.
I still have all those original files saved. They're the first thing I back up when I make hard drive backups of everything. Like I don't ever want to lose that because it's such a cool, like if Dan Earlywine came into your shop and was just like, here's my original tools, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So you did two of the blood moons, and then you moved on to which model? The crescent moon?
Um I had so the Crescent Moon is the most new, but the idea was third. I kicked around a Crescent Moon idea for a while that was a lot more similar to a brand I hate talking about, the Big G.
Uh-huh.
It looked a
Yep.
lot like the Modern or Moderny, however you want to call
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, yeah.
with kind of straight V on one side, curved V on the other, and that curved V side was more of where I was getting the Crescent Moon theme from, but I never made one. I never released it. It was never fully happy with the design. It just knew like that's the name I want. I know I want a V type model. I'll get to it one day. And it wasn't until literally end of last year, I was still doing like a more of a Dean Razorback kind of thing, a V with a horn, because I was trying to incorporate the horn into everything. And I kicked it over to Les Godfrey at Godfrey Guitars, and he said, "All right, well, let me pitch you this," and sent back the drawing that's on my
The
website.
website. Yep.
And like just like the Troublemaker, it was like, well, I love that. Let me make some minor tweaks. I just dropped that drawing straight into Illustrator, dragged it to scale to what I knew I wanted it to be to fit inside of a Gibson V silhouette. I wanted it to be less wide, less long, and now it is what it is.
Yeah, that model is sweet. And
Got it right here.
will you do, because I've noticed that you have a 6 and a line peg head, you have a 3 and a 3 peg head.
Yeah.
So do you in your custom shop, you'll switch between that by the customer's preference, I'm guessing? Okay.
Yep.
So how often when you're designing something new, do you say, okay, I'm going to do this, like this is what's going to happen here, and you kind of make that mental note, and then you get to that step in the build process and you have your oh shit moment where you say, well, hold on, I can't do this here.
Less often now,
Okay.
but that was a lot of my frustration in 2022.
Okay.
was and it always comes back to, for me at least, the template design is I'm thinking way further ahead when I'm designing everything, and then the templates get here and I'm like, okay, well, hold on. How am I going to line this up once I take that template off, or keep this from interfering with this when I cut the, it 9 times out of 10 has something to do with templating in that case. I forgot a pilot hole, or put a pilot hole where it'll show if I drill it there. It won't be under a pickguard or something. So sometimes, but I haven't done it in a while, and I think I've just gotten a lot better about knowing what my process is going to look like manufacturing wise, to know what I need out of templates. I'm much better about interchangeable templates now that work more consistently across the board, and not like, oh, I need another 6-in-line headstock template because it needs to match
a
blah,
different
blah, blah.
fretboard spec, or
different tuner hole layout or whatever.
Yeah, that's the kind of, as I'm teaching this online course, telling my students, like, yeah, like kind of the world is your oyster. But with electric guitars, the one thing that doesn't budge is hardware.
Yep.
So no matter what you do, an acoustic guitar, you can have the string spacing be whatever you want it to be, as long as your pins aren't going to bump into one another, you're good.
Right.
And then people say, well, you can buy individual saddles, like what you see on multi-scale guitars and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, you totally can, but there is still a minimum spacing that you can have there, because the hardware can't be on top of one another. So that, I always say to the students, like, go and see, as you're designing something, what companies offer you drawings of their hardware.
Yes.
Like Hipshot is the absolute best about this. You can literally download any Hipshot part and you can just put it right into your drawing and see what it's going to look like and see how it's going to fit.
Most times.
Yeah.
Some of their drawings are either just slightly off the listed spec, because like they're not giving you DXF perfect one-to-one files. They're giving you ideas. Or it has a billion geometry points, and depending on your computer, you drop it in, like their headless bridges. The fine tuners on their headless bridges are a bazillion
so
data
many
points.
Curves. Yeah.
Yeah. Very quickly, your computer's like, ah.
Yeah. I find it most useful when it comes to tuner placement on a 3-in-3 headstock.
Making sure they're not touching, or you've got enough gap in between them.
And you don't, if you're doing a volute, you don't want your volute having the tuner on it.
Top 2 tuners on my 3x3 headstock are insanely close together, and it's really only an issue on the locking ones because you got to be able to grab both of them with your fingers. So if you've got big, thick fingers, you might not like my 3x3 headstock with locking tuners, but I really like having
straight.
Generally, yeah. I know it's not a magic solution to tuning issues or anything like that, but I like it aesthetically.
Yeah.
And just in terms of minimizing any issues, if a tech needs to work on this down the line, I don't have to worry about them knowing how to cut angled slots well or whatever. Like,
yeah. And that goes back to your repair experience. Designing an instrument that, okay, when a repair tech ultimately has to work on this, what's going to happen here?
I want it to be as dummy proof as possible so that A, I don't have a tech who doesn't know what they're doing bad mouthing me to a
Yep.
customer, or B, you buy a guitar, it needs a ton of work, and now it costs you more to have it playable than what it actually cost you for the guitar, because that drives me
Exactly.
nuts.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of like where we left off in the electric design course was we were talking about making like a Fender style neck.
Mhm.
And everybody loves the Jazzmaster. Everybody
Yeah,
loves the Jaguar. But that original design of that guitar is not really great for bridge geometry.
right.
Uh, they're notorious, unless you're using a mastery bridge, they're notorious for skipping those saddles.
Hmm.
So what I told my students is, okay, you are going to be machining this. Like you're not making a standard part. Like you're taking this class because you want to custom design something,
Right.
and you got to think about neck angle if you're going to use something like a Tune-o-matic or you're going to use a mastery bridge. And so that comes down to two options when you're machining your neck. You can either put the angle into the neck, or you
Or
can
into the
put the
pocket.
angle into the pocket. But in my opinion, and
Mhm.
someone's gonna be like, you're wrong. Go argue with me, that's fine. But in my opinion, it's better to put it into the neck pocket than it is to put in the neck,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to a bolt-on neck. Because if you put something that is turnable on a guitar,
Mhm.
your customer is going to turn it no
Yep.
matter what you do. They're going to turn everything. So that neck's going to come off.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, oh, well, I'm going to put a replacement neck on it. I'm Eddie Van Halen. And what happens when all of a sudden they're great playing guitar, they put a new neck on it, and then your original neck that you made had the angle built into the heel,
Mhm.
and they
All of
go
a
and they
sudden
put
they've
a
got
replacement on it,
crazy action.
and they're like, why doesn't it play good? What happened? Like, there's a problem with the body. So that's like one of the things that I've been saying is like, let the customer in you influence your designs, because
Mhm.
like you said, you started by modifying guitars, and I'm sure you were taking necks off one thing and putting on another thing all day long.
All the time. That was
So
literally, I think, how it started was, why
yeah,
doesn't this neck fit this body?
yeah,
Why aren't these all standard?
yeah, exactly. So I say it's a pain to do the machining in such a way that, okay, it's in my neck pocket and everything is going to line up. There's not going to be gaps. But at the end of the day, when somebody ultimately decides to swap that neck for whatever reason,
Right.
um, the geometry is at least going to be right there.
Yeah,
So that's kind of like on my side of things to say, okay, well, this is how this needs to happen. And you have to do some clever thinking to make a 3-axis machine do something like that. But at the end of the day, I think it makes it worth it, and the customers seem to like that.
for
Okay,
sure.
so the Crescent Moon was number 3 in production. So what was number 2 in production then?
In production, what are
You
you gonna make
started
me
with the
think?
Blood Moon. Then what did you
Let's see.
build as your newest model after the Blood Moon?
Let me pull it up. I keep an archive list because I've done so much custom work and everything has been different. I haven't really done a lot of serial numbers.
Okay.
Um, it's mostly been dating things and then just keeping track of them on my end to know what was when. It was Strats Tellys, a Strat Telly hybrid, J Bass, my
Yeah.
Gold Top Explorer. But as far as moon models, it was, let's see, the Blood Moon, the Elite, the Moonburn was the next made one.
Okay.
And even that, I think, has been changed a lot since the first one.
So let's
A
talk
lot.
about that a little bit. So this guy, the Moonburn, were you were kind of influenced by like an RD kind of meets like a Gibson RD kind of meets the Performer? Is that what your inspiration for this was?
The Performer was like the last change to it. Um, at the time, I think my favorite guitar was an Explorer.
Okay.
Um, and like building the gold top that I have, oh man, I took it apart. It's not even behind me anymore. I can't point to it. Uh, that was, I think, the guitar I built for myself. It was like my wife bought me the wood for like Christmas or my birthday.
Uh,
Uh, Super cool build from that angle, but that was the one that made me like really go, okay, I want to do this as a business. But between that shape and then I had just started really getting into Ghost, and those guys
okay.
play
Yep.
the Hagstrom Phantom, which got me into the RD the back way. So I had bought MDF templates online of an Explorer and of an RD
Okay.
and basically drew them out onto like a big sheet of art paper, each overlapping. And then literally I split the difference between the two and then just very subtly modified certain little things until I was happy with it. And that was the first version. It still had a super rounded horn. And I made three of those. One, I screwed up the body while I was doing the bridge, because I was doing an angled, like a tunematic layout.
Uh-huh.
I then did that epoxy hexagons one that had a rounded horn, and then I did a purple like telly style one that my buddy Dean owns now. Before I finally said, I don't like that I have these other guitars with this pointy treble side horn, and then this has this big dopey phallic looking thing on it. Let me just see what it looks like with that exact same horn. I think I literally in Illustrator, I like cut at the neck pocket
And
and then
pop it right
right
on there.
cropped it off, dropped it on. I think I had to change one curve on the body of the Moonburn to make it fit. And I was like, oh wow, I love that because
That's something.
it added to the upper fret access, which I'm big on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the last modification to it. That has not changed since then either. The bevels, the forearm contour, all that has stayed pretty much the same. The only thing I've changed is the bridge and the electronics layout, depending on what people want.
Yeah, this is definitely my favorite model of yours. I'm a
Hell yeah.
sucker for anything RD shaped. I think
It's
it's such an underrated shape.
I agree. It looks awesome for whatever you want it to do too. You could play metal on it, you could play bluesy stuff on it and just have that kind of Albert King vibe if you want. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, do you find that your design choices kind of it sways your customer base? Do you see that you have a very broad range of customers, or are you're only catering to like one specific market? Like who's buying your guitars, and what is attracting them from your designs to purchasing it?
It's a fun question for me specifically because it's what I think I struggle with the most in the background.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, having done custom work as much as I have to grow the company this far, I've worked for everybody you could think of genre-wise. Like I have moons out there doing everything you could want, and it's been exciting in a way because it means my designs are malleable enough that, kind of anybody can find one they like.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also frustrating artistically because you start to lose a little bit of the control of, your target market, your marketing, all that kind of stuff. So I'm starting to try and rein that back in to not just be to whoever can afford them, uh, and be more towards, your heavier music guys, your metal, your doom stuff. Not that I want to be exclusive to that, but it fits the aesthetic a little more, I think. And even just in terms of guys that I see buying more boutique gear, that seems to be the right market for me. So that's kind of the way I'm starting to try and scoot things a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's like because your pickup configurations, your shapes, it's I've always like because I've been following what you've been doing, and it always seems like okay, like this is definitely an RD, this is associated with Ghost, or this is a performer,
Mhm.
peak of the 80s.
Mhm.
Um,
Whammy bar, humbuckers.
yeah,
Yeah.
dive bombs, let's go. But
Right.
like throwing single coils or putting P90s into it,
That's
really kind of keeps it fresh.
that's
And you
the
don't,
me flavor, I think, because
yeah,
I like music from I will literally listen to Metallica and John Mayer in the same hour.
Uh-huh.
And so sometimes a little too much of my influence gets in here and you wind up with a very S style Blood Moon or, the Troublemaker. The first two Troublemakers were very T style, pickup layout, everything. And like, yeah, that doesn't fit the way I'm trying to steer things, but that's the me in the business.
Yeah. I played when I first started actually playing in bands, I played in metal bands, which certainly is not my personality by any stretch of the imagination, but I do love metal. What I noticed was their metal of all of the genres follows trends the most.
For sure.
So when I started playing, everybody was playing the Eclipse from ESP or the LTD EC1000. That was the
Yep.
big guitar. It was the black one with the
Hmm.
yellow binding and EMGs. That was what everybody wanted. That was what everybody was playing.
Yep.
Then shortly afterwards, Fuji Gen popped up. Do you remember Fuji Gen?
I do.
And everybody started playing those.
Hmm.
And that was the big guitar. And then it shifted again to people wanting to play the Petrucci. So the
Yep.
JP15 came out and like everybody was on the JP15. You see the Majesty, like a lot of that. And Ibanez, everyone hopped Ibanez, and Ibanez was very metal.
Yeah.
Unless you were looking at like the Artcore series of guitars, they didn't really cater to anything except that.
Right.
And then Yvette Young came along and she started playing Telly style Tallmans, which the Tallman was like dead.
Right.
And then completely resurrected the Tallman from the grave and made it a Strat, made it a Telly. And then people like Tosin Abasi, who he really jumped around a lot. But
For sure.
you'll start seeing his guitars in every configuration now.
Hmm.
So he's building these extended range instruments and he's playing the most technical, brutal guitar parts, but then it's like it's a telly.
Right.
And people like Greg Koch are now playing them.
Hmm.
And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And then bands like Polyphia came around, and now we're seeing a lot more single coil in Ichiko, seeing a
Yeah.
whole lot more variation in these brands that were kind of trendy, if you
Right.
want to call it that. So it's really interesting. You see brands like Schecter who are now doing guitars that when you see it from the back, it's like, oh, that's a nice Sir. Like, what's going on over there? And then you like look at the front of it and it's a Schecter.
Right.
So I've always really liked when you see companies like, I don't see LTD really getting away from, or ESP really getting away from the metal market anytime soon. Like
Yeah.
they're set in that that genre, but then you'll see, oh, we're gonna like kind of branch out a little bit. And it's created, I think, some really interesting music as well, because you get these players that are, their home are these really thin neck instruments, jumbo frets, like all of these high performing instruments with a lot of body cutaways, and then they're like, oh, I'm gonna play country now. So I really appreciated that.
It's very interesting from a business perspective, having to balance that, I think, and trying to make sure you have guitars that are going to just kind of keep selling, not necessarily be timeless, but like be the pillars of your business, but also having the time to, well, I don't know, we're going to make a thin body classical guitar with an electric neck on it, and Tim Henson's going to come along, and all of a sudden that's going to be popular now. Everyone's back on classical guitar out of
Yeah,
nowhere, which
yeah.
is awesome. I'm really glad I'm not doing tech work anymore because I'm sure it would be a headache for me right now. But uh, finding the time to do those like experimental inspired things to push the designs instead of waiting for what people want is a really fun, like fun and stressful valley to have to live in.
Yeah, we should probably talk about the exomoons, because this is kind of in line with what we're talking about.
For sure.
When did you start adding this as a model? When did you start working on these? When were these produced?
I finished the prototype, which is hanging upstairs. I should have brought it down. I finished the prototype in March of 2020.
Okay. So was that
The
that
worst
was
time.
that was kind of in the midst of Fender doing the Acoustasonic stuff?
We
Was that
we basically
implement?
dropped the like the first versions of each right around the same time.
Okay, cool.
And I don't want to sit here and bash Fender, but it is kind of my whole thing. I don't like the Acoustasonics personally.
Uh-huh.
I think everything they did with that from a design standpoint is the exact opposite of what I was looking to do. I made mine because I really liked the Kiesel Zeus acoustic, which
Okay.
was, a hollow, small, thin body, pretty standard electric with a piezo somewhere under a headless bridge that just seemed like a more sturdy, roadworthy acoustic style instrument because at the
Yep.
time I was playing out an open mic constantly and doing a lot of solo acoustic stuff. Nothing super technical, but I was lugging my wife bought me a PRS acoustic for our wedding.
Okay.
So I was playing that and I love that guitar, but I'm also very protective of it because of how I got it, right?
Yeah, and
So I wanted
acoustics,
some,
it's like traveling with a dog. It's like, oh,
yes,
gotta go into the store, can't leave the window down, like someone's gonna smash my window.
I got to be careful
Uh,
of the case and make sure it goes back in the case, make sure the humidipacks are in there and
exactly. Yeah.
all of that. I wanted something that was the opposite. I wanted something I could toss in a gig bag, I could throw around and not worry about it, not worry about it getting cracked. Um, I knew I'd be plugging it in, so I didn't really have to worry about projection acoustically.
Yep.
Um, and I wanted it to be playable, so I could do, some solo-y type stuff if I wanted to.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was look into piezos that I liked. And the GraphTech Go system just kind of worked the best for what I wanted to do. I didn't want to try and trap a ribbon piezo like under saddle pickup under a bridge.
Yep.
Um, and really didn't like some of the other more expensive systems. Like I didn't want to get into the what's the one Fishman makes, the Power Bridge.
Hmm.
Um, not a bad system. It sounds great by all means, but at the time I couldn't make that make sense
Yeah.
cost wise and installation wise. Just seemed like it would be a little too much for what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. The idea was a more sturdy open mic guitar than a regular acoustic.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, I still love that thing. I play it all the time. It's nice and easy to play on the couch compared to a big
Oh
body
yeah.
acoustic, without also being as loud as an acoustic. So if you're playing at midnight like me after my wife goes to bed, I don't want to be blasting music in the living room, but I
Uh-huh.
want to try and practice at some point. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and you get the ability to use lighter gauge strings on a guitar like that. You're not having to
Hmm.
deal with phosphor brown strings, so on and so
Oh,
forth.
yeah, the
And
design.
you're, and you're
The
not dealing with a traditional acoustic saddle too, so you can intonate
that
that bad boy.
that's what I don't like about the Fender. I don't know why they went with a full acoustic bridge. If you're still also going to add an electric pickup, like why didn't you put an electric bridge?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
So you offer like the ones I'm looking at your site,
Mhm.
and these are all in the blood moon shape. But I think because I read through everything last night,
Yeah. At
and
the time when I was still making a lot of them, I had only really offered it in the blood moon shape, and it started to create some confusion about what that model was called. Because people would see a full electric blood moon and be like, "Oh, it's an exomoon." Like, well, it's not. It doesn't have any acoustic
uh-huh.
capabilities. So I needed to kind of rework that marketing a little bit, but also, from a design perspective, I could do the same thing with any of the shapes. They don't even really have to be hollow. That's kind of just a design choice, really.
Yeah.
Um,
And it,
so
it
yeah,
makes the player feel a bit more, this is what an acoustic should feel like.
yes,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. So is there a big I'm guessing not, but is there a big variation in design between a blood moon and an exo moon? Like are you having to change the way you're beveling the inside of the guitar, how you're or I mean the outside of the guitar to handle the carves on the inside? Do you have a belly cut on your blood moons?
None of the ones I've done so far had a tummy cut.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have three or four. I'd say they're in progress, but I haven't started them yet. I have three
That's
or
in
four
progress.
orders
You
coming
thought
up.
about it. It's okay.
Yeah, they're planned out. I have the templates already designed. I have, I think, two troublemakers, a moonburn, and a crescent XO. That all I accounted for contours in how I hollow the inside out because they're also fully hollow. The only thing happening inside that guitar structurally is the neck pocket, the rim around the outside, you know, whatever I left for contours, and then a block under the bridge for the posts to mount into.
And you're completely hollow around the inside of that block too. So the whole, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's like I always thought that was really interesting. Because you'll see, I think you're the only person that I've seen who is making I mean, there are plenty of versions of acoustic electric instruments,
Mhm.
like Godin's doing one and all that. But
The Godins
yours,
are nice. I've worked on a handful of those.
yeah, but yours and the Fender are the closest I think to an electric.
Mhm.
But most people that I see doing a more electric acoustic electric, they're gravitating towards what Fender's doing, and you see
Right.
so many knockoffs of the Jazzmaster Acoustasonic with the pickup and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so I always thought it was interesting. You have to think about, okay, if I'm going to put a belly cut on this for this thin line instrument, if you want to call it a thin line instrument,
Mhm.
I need to think of that on the inside and like how I can't go and be carving away and go peekaboo. Now I got a back sound port going on. So that's always a really interesting thing, and that's going to change for you between your different shapes.
Right.
So whereas with something that's designed in CAD, I can say, okay, here's my shape of my belly cut. I'm going to copy this from somewhere else and see, kind of start from that.
Yeah.
Whereas from like a hand building perspective of things, it's like, okay, this shape has this, and I need to make sure that I'm leaving that material there in order for X, Y, and Z to happen.
Yeah.
And the thing that, I mean, both sides of the build, if you're doing it on a CNC machine or you're doing it by hand, is you're never going to run into these problems immediately.
Nope.
You're going to
It's
be doing something and then
yep.
you're going to be like, whoa, hold on, what's that?
Yep. A file mark is just slightly too deep, and you spend a little too long sanding that out, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden there's a little almost translucent spot. It's like, well, what? Hold on. What is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So let's,
I've sort of eliminated that so far by basically I have little cutout pieces of each of my contour shapes, forearms and tummy cuts
yeah.
that I trace onto each one now, so they're at least consistent. And
Okay.
I know, like, all right, the inside is marked, an eighth inch or however far from that. Don't go past that pencil line.
Yeah.
You know,
To the line, not through the line.
if you stop short of it, that's okay.
Yeah.
Do not go past that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the last model, and well, there's two more models. So you have, what came first, the Mjolnir or the Troublemaker?
Mjolnir was first, and honestly, very, very similar in the birthing process there. Uh, my buddy Ragnar over at Raven Celt, who does a lot of modifications to existing guitars and making them way cooler, um, posted a drawing, just a sketch, just a quick pencil sketch of this design as a dulcimer on his Instagram stories. Uh, I talked to him a good bit. We hadn't really worked together at that point, but I hit him up and said, "Hey, can we do that as a guitar, or is that something you're working on?" And he said, "Yeah, totally." And I stopped, I dropped everything I was doing. I was inspired, sat down, same thing. I think I screenshotted his stories, dropped it in the Illustrator, and kind of blew it up and stretched it out until it was the size I thought would make sense. And then just went at it. I made the thing, hit him up like, "Hey, here it is. Do you want to do artwork on it?" Shipped it down to him, and then he did all that by hand on there. Uh, And yeah, now I have it. That
Yeah, that's
was
awesome.
purely just that looks awesome. Let's make that into reality, and then went at it.
So the one thing I was always curious about with this guitar, because I
Mhm.
remember seeing this one pop up, is there's a little block in at the bout of the guitar.
Yeah,
What is that block for?
aesthetics.
Aesthetics. Okay,
Yeah, I wanted if you are a traditional axe maker or hammer, if you've made mallets,
I
that's
see.
typically where you would mount the tensioning block to hold the head of that unit in place. This isn't hammered onto the neck, so it didn't need to be real, but it did present a very good place to put the strap button and
Okay,
to basically stand the instrument up so that it's not constantly wanting to teeter if you like sit it on the floor
that
next to
makes
your
sense.
desk. Or
Yeah.
yeah,
And so this is the only guitar that. So is that a string doctor, or they call it a it's a string doctor, right? Or
I
string butler?
it's certainly inspired by the string butler. I love those things. I think they're great. Again, based on the drawing he put up, I knew I'm just going to grab it so I can actually look at it. I knew I wanted the tuners to stay in that same layout. They worked with the artwork he had drawn,
Yep.
and so we went with Steinberger tuners on it that
Yep.
kind of, you tune from the back. But the string pull on it would have been insane to keep the strings from rubbing against the other tuner posts.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I took a little stainless steel rod and just installed basically little rivets in the headstock for the strings to travel past to keep it functional, really.
Yeah. So this is a great example of you didn't want to, we go and we design peg heads, and we want them to work in such a way that, okay, like when I put the strings on, I'm not going to have my tuners bumping into one another, and you want the straightest string pull. And one of the questions that one of my students had was, well, why don't I just draw my tuners first and draw the string path and then build my peg head around that? I said, yeah, you can absolutely do that. But on a 3-and-3 peg head, with a 3-and-3 peg head, and you want to have straight string pull, it's always going to be somewhat triangular in shape.
Right.
That is
It
just
has to
what
be
naturally happens.
right.
Unless you're going to go and you're going to make longer shafts for your buttons or whatnot. So what I said was, okay, well, design your peg head and get something that you like first,
Right.
because otherwise everyone's peg head is either going to look like like Breed Love is a really good example, or
Yeah.
PRS. They always have that kind of triangular shape to them. I said, get into a point where you like it and then modify it from there. But this is a perfect example of saying, well, what could I use hardware wise to keep my peg head shape the way that I want it to be, but still have that tuning stability and have the tuners where I want them to be.
It would not have come to be that way by any means if I didn't find those exact tuners. I think I got them from Stu Mac too. Like that might have been the only place I found that had something that would work the way I wanted it to. And straight up, like you're saying, that made the design possible without me having to take a step back and say, all right, well, maybe we do it headless somehow so that you still have this pommel shape at the top, but it's not really a headstock or, something to that effect. It just kind of
Yeah,
happy accident worked out.
that's so cool, and that's a great way. Normally you have to work around the hardware, but you made the hardware work for you.
Sometimes I get lucky.
So the final model is the Troublemaker, and then the Feldhaus series. Those are your other models, but you worked with an artist, so that's a collaboration.
Hmm.
The Troublemaker, this is your most telly style. This is your most T-styled instrument. So what's the story behind this guy? What informed the design elements that you went with as you were designing this?
Similar in story to the Crescent Moon and working with Les Godfrey. I had the Blood Moon, I had the Elite, both double cutaways. I had the Moonburn, pretty extreme, pretty clear, who that's going to appeal to. I didn't have a single cutaway. I didn't have anything for your Les Paul guys. I didn't have anything for your Telly guys. I didn't have something that I could as easily make work. I could put a Tune-o-matic and humbuckers on anything. It's not going to necessarily appeal to the guys that like the feel of a Les Paul in their lap or whatever.
Hmm.
I had, I think, 4 or 5 different designs, and I wasn't unhappy with them, but nothing ever hit a point where I was like, that's it. That fits the theme. That's on brand. I love it. Let's go. I think I'd had a customer hit me up, someone who has ordered multiple guitars from me, who was interested in, the same kind of thing I was after. And so with that little extra pressure on me, I reached out to Les, who I hadn't worked with either at the time yet. I just talked to a bit, same way we do, DMs, memes, whatever here and there, commiserating about people whining in our DMs or whatever. I reached out to him and said, hey, I have this idea. I'm happy to pay you for your time to kind of give me some pointers just on the design. How do I make this flow better? I don't know what it is about me and Les that just clicks mentally. But I swear to you, maybe a half hour went by. Same thing. He sent me a drawing and said, what do you think about this? And like immediately my mood shifted, everything. I was like, I love that. Whatever you just did, modification from what I sent you is exactly what I was looking for that I didn't know I was looking for. And it's just the angle that the horn kind of follows up across to the bass side, the way
Yep.
that the pickguard follows the contours, like everything about it is just very on a fine detail level, like exactly what I wanted while still kind of keeping the theme of the rest of the models. It has the same, I always say the ass, it's the bottom of the body.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, Kind of it's the same angle of offset as the Elite has. I think it is still the exact same size treble side horn as the Blood Moon. I just changed the position a little bit. Yeah, and then I think I started reversing the headstock on those so that that curve also follows that same arch from, across the horns and the
Yeah.
top of the body. I straight up, same thing. He sent me a drawing. I dropped everything I was doing, popped it into Illustrator with, the rest of my design layout already there, and I just erased the old body outline, traced the new body outline on, scooted it around a little bit, and was like, that's it. And
Yeah.
same thing, one and done. The first attempt at that, I cut one out and I was like, that's right. It sits in your lap. Great. I think I've modified the contours on it maybe very slightly just to make it stay where I want it to stay in your lap a little better.
Hmm.
But that's always something I've kind of told myself that I'd always do by hand, even if I start CNCing stuff more, because I take a body and I sit it on my lap and mark where the body touches me and notch that out and then start making measurements from there to see like, okay, well, that's where it's going to hit you and impact you. So I need it to be mobile around that spot. I need to know how deep it should reach down without interfering with a potential trem cavity.
Yep.
Yeah, that part's just always way more fun to do by hand to see once you have one, where do you touch it? Where are you going to rub away corners if it was a slab style body? Like,
Uh-huh.
it is a huge toss up for me in what is my favorite model, but I think I had the most excitement about my job and about the potential of a model with the Troublemaker because I feel like I made a mistake in making the first one Telly style because I think it was really meant to be much more of like a Wolfgang or
Yeah. Yeah.
a Les Paul Jr. Like pop some P90s in that with a Tune-o-matic, and
Uh-huh.
that's my answer to that because it works for whatever you want. It's such a cool single cutaway design that I don't see any other single cutaways that kind of hit all the boxes it hits, especially again, upper fret access. You can grab that 24th fret with like
Oh
your
yeah.
middle finger if you wanted to.
It's cool to see because you can see a progression through your models. Like it's not like you're coming out of left field doing like with the next model. Like you can see kind of the thought process.
Mhm.
So I think my final question, and this was like kind of as you were like, oh, we should come up with a list. And I was like, I have one question that I know I need to ask, and that's what's next.
Oh, next, well, my chart right now very much looks like the meme of step 1, step 2, step 3, question mark, step 4, profit. Uh,
Like the staircase one where like the guy is, yeah.
exactly. Uh, so much of the past year and a half of business has been me constantly on my back foot, problem solving, um, trying to eliminate issues and uncovering other issues, or um, working with different vendors and then having problems with that vendor. Uh, my plan right now is to get caught up on custom orders while trying to put more things in place business wise so that everything isn't relying on me because I'm a one-man show. And if I'm tied up fixing problems and not getting things done, if I have mystery health issues, which is a new fun thing, uh, everything is shut down until, I'm back from the doctors or whatever. Um, so I want to get more automated. I want to start seeing more of the Eclipse series stuff so that that's at least happening in the background.
Yeah.
If orders are coming in for that, then money's still coming in and it's not extra stress on my back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I think a lot of the progress for me next is in building the company up a little stronger and not as much of the guitars or the designs. But the next design I have cooked up is for
Ooh,
sure going to be another double cutaway.
nice.
I have one customer who's beating my door down for more of like a more symmetrical double cutaway style thing. And kind of same boat where I know where I'm at in that progress or process, and I know probably what needs to happen to make the model come to life. It's just I'm not happy with what I've got so far. And I think this design has gone through more iterations than anything I've ever done, and I'm just not happy with
So it sounds
anything
like
I've come up with so far.
I think there's a call to less that's coming up.
Basically,
At
yeah.
this point
I
in the story, it's sounding like
and
there's going to be a call coming up.
I've reached out to him once about it, and I didn't not like what we came up with, but it wasn't what I was looking for.
Okay.
So the nice part is I have that design that we cooked up in my back pocket for at some point if I want it.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think I need to reduce a lot of the current stress so that I can
Yeah.
kind of come at it clean and a little
Focus.
more energized. Yeah, so that the idea will jump out at me and it's not me trying to force an idea.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I can't wait to see that.
Hell yeah, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah.